The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty trading post, and Eleanor Zimmerman pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching tumbleweeds scatter across the main street of Hillsboro, Texas, like lost souls searching for somewhere to belong. She stepped down from the coach on unsteady legs, her traveling dress clinging to her skin in the oppressive heat of the August afternoon in 1878. The driver tossed her trunk to the ground with little ceremony, and she flinched at the harsh thud. Everything she owned was in that trunk, which was not much at all. Her aunt had made that abundantly clear in the letter that had arrived 3 weeks ago, the one that had changed everything. "We cannot continue to house you, Eleanor. Your uncle has secured you a position as a seamstress in Texas. The family who has agreed to take you in runs a general store. You will work for your keep. Do not make us regret this arrangement." Eleanor pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders despite the heat, a familiar gesture of making herself smaller, less noticeable. 22 years of being told she was a burden had a way of making a woman disappear into herself. Her parents had died when she was 7, and her aunt and uncle had taken her in with the enthusiasm one might reserve for a leaky roof that needed constant repair. The general store stood before her, its wooden sign creaking in the hot breeze. Zimmerman and Sons, it read, which made her heart sink. She had the same last name purely by coincidence, but it felt like some cosmic joke. Here she was, arriving at a store that bore her family name, yet she had never felt less like she belonged anywhere. Before she could gather the courage to enter, the door swung open and a tall cowboy emerged, his hat tilted low against the sun. He nearly collided with her, and his hand shot out to steady her elbow with surprising gentleness. "Pardon me, miss," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried a warmth she had not expected. He lifted his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his temples and eyes the color of strong coffee. "I was not watching where I was going." "No, it was my fault," Eleanor said quickly, automatically assuming blame as she always did. "I should not have been standing so close to the door." He studied her for a moment, and she found herself unable to look away. There was something in his expression that made her feel less invisible, as though he actually saw her standing there. It was an unfamiliar sensation that made her pulse quicken. "You just arrived on the stage?" he asked, glancing at her trunk. "Yes, I am Eleanor Zimmerman. I am here to work for the family at the general store." His expression shifted, something unreadable passing across his features. "That would be the Patterson family. I am Dalton Young. I have the ranch just outside town." "It is nice to meet you, Mr. Young," she said, offering a small curtsy that felt ridiculous the moment she completed it. This was Texas, not Boston, but Dalton did not laugh at her. Instead, he bent down and lifted her trunk with ease, the muscles in his arms evident even through his cotton shirt. "Let me help you with this. The Pattersons are good people, but they work their employees hard. Fair, but hard." Eleanor wanted to protest that she could manage, that she did not want to be a burden, but the words died in her throat. She had learned long ago that protesting only made people more annoyed with her existence. So she followed him into the store, trying not to notice the way he moved with a confident grace that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin in a way she could not imagine being. The interior of the store was dim and cluttered, smelling of leather and tobacco, and something sweet she could not identify. A woman emerged from behind the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 40, with sharp features and sharper eyes that assessed Eleanor in a single sweeping glance. "Mrs. Patterson," Dalton said, setting the trunk down carefully, "your new seamstress has arrived." "So I see," Mrs. Patterson said. Her voice was not unkind, but it held no particular warmth either. "Thank you, Dalton. I trust you will be at the barn dance on Saturday. Would not miss it, madam, he replied. His eyes flicked to Eleanor once more, something in his gaze that made her stomach flutter in a way that felt both alarming and oddly pleasant. Then he touched the brim of his hat and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Mrs. Patterson wasted no time. You will stay in the room above the store. There is a cot and a wash basin. You will take your meals with us, but you will earn them. I expect you up at dawn to help with the store before you begin your sewing work. We have orders backed up for 2 months. Your aunt wrote that you were skilled with a needle. It was the only skill Eleanor possessed, the only thing her aunt had ever praised her for, and even then the praise had been grudging. Yes, madam, I can sew most anything. Good. Because if you cannot, you will find yourself on the next stage out of here, and I will not be responsible for where you end up. Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. This was not the fresh start she had desperately hoped for. This was simply her old life in a new location, complete with the same message. Prove you are worth the space you occupy or disappear. The room above the store was exactly as described. A cot with a thin mattress, a wash basin with a cracked mirror, and a single window that looked out onto the main street. Eleanor unpacked her few belongings and laid them in the small trunk that served as her only furniture besides the cot. 3 dresses, all practical and worn, sewing supplies. A book of poetry her mother had given her, the only thing she had left from before. She stood at the window as the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold that took her breath away. For all her anxiety, she had to admit the land here held a wild beauty that called to something deep within her. Back east, everything had been confined, controlled, proper. Here, the horizon stretched endlessly, and the very air seemed to promise possibility. Movement below caught her eye. Dalton Young was crossing the street, leading a beautiful chestnut horse. He glanced up at her window, and even from this distance, she could see him smile. He touched his hat again, a gesture that seemed to be directed specifically at her, and she found herself smiling back before she could think better of it. That night, lying on the unfamiliar cot, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of wondering. What would it be like to be the sort of woman a man like Dalton Young might notice? Not just a polite acknowledgement, but truly see. She dismissed the thought almost immediately. She had nothing to offer anyone. She was a charity case, a burden passed from one family to another, useful only for the work her hands could produce. But as she drifted off to sleep, she could not quite shake the memory of his smile or the gentleness with which he had handled her trunk, as though her belongings mattered, as though she mattered. The next morning arrived far too early. Eleanor woke to the sound of someone pounding on her door, Mrs. Patterson's voice sharp as a whip crack. "Time to work, girl. Sun is already up." Eleanor dressed quickly in the dim light and hurried downstairs. Mrs. Patterson put her to work immediately, having her dust shelves, organize inventory, and help customers who wandered in looking for everything from flour to rifle ammunition. By the time breakfast arrived, Eleanor's arms ached and her stomach was growling so loudly she was certain everyone could hear it. Breakfast was simple fare: eggs, bacon, and strong coffee. Mr. Patterson was a quiet man who barely acknowledged her presence, which Eleanor actually found preferable to scrutiny. Their 2 sons, both younger than Eleanor, ignored her completely, which suited her just fine. After breakfast, Mrs. Patterson led her to a small room off the main store. "This is where you will do your sewing. I have orders written down here." She thrust a ledger at Eleanor. "Start with the most urgent and work your way down, and do not waste fabric. We cannot afford mistakes." Eleanor opened the ledger and felt her eyes widen. There were indeed 2 months' worth of orders, maybe more. Shirts that needed mending, dresses to be altered, curtains to be made, even a wedding dress that needed intricate beadwork. It was more work than one person could reasonably complete in the time allotted, but Eleanor knew better than to protest. She set to work immediately, her fingers moving with the practiced efficiency that came from years of sewing everything her aunt and uncle's family needed. The light in the small room was not ideal, and by midday her eyes were beginning to strain. But she pushed through, driven by the fear that had become her constant companion, the fear of being unwanted, unnecessary, disposable. She was so focused on her work that she did not hear the door open. Only when a shadow fell across her fabric did she look up, startled, to find Dalton Young standing in the doorway, holding his hat in his hands. "Mr. Young," she said, setting down her needle, "I did not hear you come in." "Did not mean to startle you," he said. His eyes took in the cramped room, the poor lighting, the pile of work surrounding her. Something in his expression tightened. "Mrs. Patterson mentioned you were back here. I came to pick up the shirts I left for mending last week." "Oh, I have not gotten to those yet," Eleanor said, feeling panic rise in her chest. "I am so sorry. I can have them done by tomorrow if you need them urgently." "No rush," he said quickly. "I have others. I just wanted to check in and—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I wanted to ask if you might like to attend the barn dance this Saturday. With me." Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "The barn dance?" "Yes, madam. There is one every month at the Miller Ranch. Music, dancing, food. It is a good time, and it would give you a chance to meet folks in town." He shifted his weight, and she realized with surprise that he seemed nervous. "I would be honored to escort you if you are willing." Every instinct Eleanor possessed screamed at her to refuse. She did not belong at a dance. She would not know anyone. She would embarrass herself. But looking at Dalton's earnest face, at the way he was asking her rather than telling her, at the genuine invitation in his eyes, she found herself saying something she had not expected. "I would like that very much, Mr. Young." His smile transformed his face, making him almost unbearably handsome. "Please call me Dalton. I will come by to collect you around 6 on Saturday if that suits." "That suits," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. After he left, she sat motionless for several minutes, trying to process what had just happened. A man had asked her to a dance. Not just any man, but Dalton Young, who seemed kind and thoughtful and who made her feel something she could not quite name. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The rest of the week passed in a blur of sewing and store work. Mrs. Patterson kept her busy from dawn until well after dark, and Eleanor fell into bed each night too exhausted to do more than close her eyes. But through it all, she held onto the thought of Saturday like a candle flame in the darkness. On Saturday afternoon, Mrs. Patterson seemed to take pity on her. Or perhaps she simply did not want to be embarrassed by having her employees show up to the dance looking haggard. "You can finish early today," she said. "Go make yourself presentable, and do not embarrass this establishment." Eleanor fled upstairs and surveyed her meager wardrobe with dismay. She had nothing suitable for a dance. Her dresses were all worn and practical, designed for work rather than social occasions. But she had her sewing skills, and she had a few hours. She chose the least worn of her dresses, a simple blue cotton that brought out her eyes, and set to work transforming it. She added a bit of lace she found in the store's inventory, promising herself she would pay Mrs. Patterson back from her wages. She took in the waist to better show her figure and added small tucks that made the skirt move more gracefully. When she was finished, she assessed herself in the cracked mirror. She would never be beautiful, she thought. Her face was too plain, her features too unremarkable. But the dress fit well. and when she let down her hair from its usual severe bun, allowing it to fall in soft waves around her shoulders, she thought she looked almost pretty. Almost. Dalton arrived precisely at 6, and when Eleanor opened the door, she saw something flicker in his eyes that looked almost like wonder. It was gone so quickly she convinced herself she had imagined it. "You look lovely," he said simply. "Thank you," Eleanor replied, accepting his arm as they walked to his wagon. He helped her up onto the seat with a steadying hand, and she found herself acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched, even briefly. The ride to the Miller Ranch took about 20 minutes, and Dalton filled the time by telling her about the town and its residents. He had an easy way of talking that required little from her, which she appreciated. She had never been good at conversation, too afraid of saying the wrong thing. "How are you finding the work at the store?" he asked eventually. Eleanor considered lying, saying everything was fine, but something about Dalton made her want to be honest. "It is a lot of work, but I am managing." "Mrs. Patterson has a reputation for being demanding," Dalton said carefully. "If it becomes too much, you can say something. You do not have to just accept whatever is put on you." The idea was so foreign to Eleanor that she almost laughed. "Where I come from, you do exactly that. You accept what is given and you are grateful for it." Dalton looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt exposed in a way that was not entirely comfortable. "That is a hard way to live." "It is the only way I know," she admitted. They arrived at the Miller Ranch as the sun was beginning to set. The barn had been cleared and decorated with lanterns, and a small group of musicians was setting up in the corner. People milled about, dressed in their finest, laughing and talking. Eleanor felt her anxiety spike. She did not know how to do this, how to be among people who seemed so comfortable with themselves and each other. But Dalton kept his hand on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd, introducing her to people whose names she immediately forgot. They were friendly enough, curious about the new seamstress from back east, but their attention was fleeting. They had their own friends, their own concerns. When the music started, Dalton led her onto the dance floor. "I should warn you," he said with a smile, "I am not the best dancer." "That makes two of us," Eleanor replied, and was rewarded with a laugh. But as it turned out, Dalton was being modest. He was a perfectly adequate dancer, and he led with enough confidence that Eleanor felt herself relaxing into the rhythm. She had not danced since she was a child before her parents died, but her body seemed to remember the basic steps. "You are doing great," Dalton said softly, his breath warm against her ear. "You are a good teacher," she replied. They danced several more songs, and Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying it. In Dalton's arms, she felt less like a burden and more like a woman someone might actually choose to spend time with. It was intoxicating and frightening all at once. When they took a break, Dalton fetched her some punch and they stood at the edge of the barn, watching the other dancers. A woman approached them, beautiful and confident, her dress far finer than Eleanor's modified cotton. "Dalton Young, you have been hiding from me all evening," she said, her voice playful but with an edge that Eleanor could not quite identify. "Miss Catherine," Dalton said, his tone polite but noticeably cooler than it had been with Eleanor. "How are you this evening?" "I would be better if you would dance with me," Catherine said. Her eyes flicked to Eleanor, dismissing her in an instant. "I am sure your companion would not mind." Eleanor opened her mouth to say it was fine, to defer as she always did, but Dalton spoke first. "Actually, I would mind," he said firmly. "I came with Eleanor, and I intend to spend the evening with her, if you will excuse us." He guided Eleanor away, leaving Catherine standing there with an expression of shocked indignation. Eleanor's heart was pounding. No one had ever chosen her over someone else, especially not someone as beautiful and wealthy as Catherine clearly was. "I am sorry about that," Dalton said. "Catherine has had it in her head that we would end up married, despite me never giving her any indication that was my intention." "She is very beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "She is also very spoiled and used to getting what she wants," Dalton replied. "Beauty is not everything, Eleanor, not even close." They stayed at the dance until late in the evening, and by the time Dalton drove her back to town, Eleanor felt like a different person. She had danced, she had laughed, she had been seen. It was more than she had dared to hope for. When they arrived at the store, Dalton helped her down from the wagon and walked her to the door. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said. "So did I," Eleanor replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Would you allow me to call on you again? Perhaps next Sunday after church?" Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. Dalton smiled, that warm, genuine smile that made her feel like the only person in the world. "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Dalton." She watched him drive away before climbing the stairs to her small room. She lay in bed, replaying every moment of the evening, hardly able to believe it had been real. For the first time in years, she felt a small spark of something she had thought lost forever: hope. The next few weeks fell into a pattern. Eleanor worked long hours at the store and in the sewing room, but Sundays became her day of light. Dalton would collect her after church, and they would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes they would ride out to his ranch, where he showed her the cattle operation he was building. Other times they would walk along the creek that ran behind town, talking about everything and nothing. Dalton had a way of asking her questions that made her feel like her opinions mattered. He wanted to know what she thought about things, what she liked, what she dreamed about. It was disorienting at first, being treated as though her thoughts had value. And slowly, carefully, Eleanor began to open up. She told him about her childhood, about losing her parents, about the years spent with her aunt and uncle who had made it clear she was a burden. She told him about the constant feeling of being in the way, of taking up space she had not earned. Dalton listened to all of it, his expression growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he took her hand gently in his. "Eleanor, I need you to hear something, and I need you to believe it. What they did to you, the way they made you feel, it was wrong. You are not a burden. You never were. You are valuable just because you exist, not because of what you can do for other people." Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. "I do not know how to believe that." "Then I will keep telling you until you do," Dalton said simply. "Every day if I have to." And he did. In the weeks that followed, Dalton found countless small ways to show Eleanor her worth. He brought her wildflowers he had picked on his morning rides. He complimented her work, not just her sewing but her patience with difficult customers at the store. He asked her advice about problems on his ranch, and when she gave it, he actually listened and often implemented her suggestions. When she mentioned in passing that she missed reading, that there had been a library near her aunt's house that had been her refuge, he showed up the next day with 3 books borrowed from the school teacher. When she worked too late and missed dinner, he brought her food, insisting she needed to take care of herself. Most importantly, he never made her feel like his attention was charity. He made it clear, through his actions and his words, that he spent time with her because he wanted to, because he enjoyed her company, because she brought something to his life. Eleanor found herself changing under the steady warmth of his regard. She started expressing her opinions more freely, first with him and then, tentatively, with others. When Mrs. Patterson asked her to complete an unreasonable amount of work in too little time, Eleanor found herself saying, "I can do my best, but that timeline is not realistic. I would rather do good work than rushed work." Mrs. Patterson had been surprised but had backed down, and the work had been excellent when Eleanor finished it on a more reasonable schedule. Eleanor began to hold her head higher, to look people in the eye when she spoke to them. The change did not go unnoticed in town. Other women began to seek her out, inviting her to quilting circles and church socials. She made friends, something she had never really had before. But through it all, it was Dalton who remained her anchor, her constant reminder that she deserved good things. One Sunday in October, about 3 months after Eleanor had arrived in Hillsboro, Dalton took her on a ride to a place he said was special to him. They rode for about an hour, their horses moving at an easy pace through the beautiful Texas landscape. The air had cooled slightly with the changing season, and the sky was a brilliant blue. They arrived at a spot where the creek widened into a small pond, surrounded by cottonwood trees whose leaves were just beginning to turn gold. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a hidden oasis in the rough country. "This is where I come when I need to think," Dalton said, helping Eleanor down from her horse. "When I first came to Texas, I was running from some bad choices I had made back in Kansas. I felt like I had ruined my life, like I did not deserve a fresh start." Eleanor looked at him in surprise. He had shared bits of his past, but never this. "What happened?" "I got mixed up with the wrong people, made some decisions I am not proud of. Nothing violent," he added quickly, seeing her expression. "But I helped some men hide stolen goods, looked the other way when I should not have. When it all came out, my family was ashamed. My father told me I was a disappointment, that I had disgraced the family name." "That must have been so painful," Eleanor said softly. "It was. I left Kansas and came here with almost nothing. I worked as a ranch hand for a few years, saved every penny I could. When I had enough, I bought some land and started my own place. It has not been easy, but I have built something I am proud of, something that is mine, earned through honest work." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I am telling you this because I want you to understand something. I know what it is like to feel worthless, to believe the worst things people say about you. And I know what it is like to slowly realize those things were lies. You are not what your aunt and uncle told you. You are not a burden, Eleanor. You are strong, talented, kind, and beautiful, and I have fallen completely in love with you." Eleanor felt her heart stop and then race forward. "What?" "I love you," Dalton repeated. "I have loved you since the first moment I saw you standing in front of the general store, looking lost and scared but still brave enough to be there. I love the way you concentrate when you are sewing, the way you listen when people talk, the way you see the good in everyone. I love your laugh, which you do not share nearly enough, and the way you look at the sunset like it is a miracle every single time." Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face now, and she made no effort to stop them. "I do not know what to say." "Say you feel even a fraction of what I feel," Dalton said, taking her hands in his. "Say you will let me court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife, if you will have me." Eleanor thought about the girl who had arrived in Hillsboro 3 months ago, convinced she had nothing to offer anyone. She thought about how Dalton had patiently, consistently, lovingly shown her a different truth. He had proved her value not through grand gestures but through daily, constant affirmation. He had seen her when she felt invisible. He had chosen her when she felt unworthy of being chosen. And somewhere along the way she had fallen in love with him too, with his kindness, his steadiness, his strength, and his vulnerability, with the way he made her feel safe and valued and seen. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I did not think I could, I did not think I knew how, but I do. I love you, Dalton Young." He pulled her into his arms then, holding her close, and Eleanor melted into the embrace. She had never felt so safe, so cherished, so completely herself with another person. When they finally pulled apart, Dalton was grinning. "So that is a yes to courting you," Eleanor laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside her. "Yes, that is a yes." They spent the rest of the afternoon by the pond, talking and dreaming about the future. Dalton told her about his plans for the ranch, how he wanted to expand it, maybe add some horses to go along with the cattle. Eleanor shared her secret dream of opening her own dressmaking shop one day, a place where women could come not just for clothes but for a sympathetic ear and a kind word. "You could do that," Dalton said. "You have the skill and you have the heart for it. I would help you however I could." The idea that someone believed in her dreams, that someone wanted to help her achieve them rather than dismiss them as foolish, was still so new that Eleanor felt tears threaten again. But these were happy tears, the kind that came from joy rather than pain. As the sun began to set, they rode back toward town. They were about a mile out when they saw smoke rising into the sky. A lot of smoke. "That is coming from town," Dalton said, his voice tight with concern. He urged his horse faster, and Eleanor did the same, her heart pounding with sudden fear. They arrived to find chaos. The building next to the general store was on fire, flames leaping high into the darkening sky. People were running in every direction, forming bucket brigades from the water pump in the center of town. Eleanor's first thought was for the Pattersons. She dismounted before her horse had fully stopped and ran toward the store. Mrs. Patterson was standing in the street, her face streaked with soot, clutching her two sons. "Is everyone out?" Eleanor shouted over the roar of the fire. "Yes, we got everyone out," Mrs. Patterson said. "But the store might go too if they cannot stop the fire from spreading." Eleanor looked at the building where she had spent the last 3 months working. The building that housed all her belongings, meager as they were. But more than that, she thought of all the fabric inside, all the orders she had been working on, the wedding dress she had almost finished. Without thinking, she started toward the store. "Eleanor, no." Dalton's voice cut through the noise, and then his hand was on her arm, pulling her back. "It is too dangerous. But all my work, all those orders, people are counting on me to finish them," Eleanor protested. "They are just things," Dalton said fiercely. "You are what matters. You are irreplaceable. The rest can be remade." The fire brigade worked through the night, and by some miracle they managed to stop the fire from spreading beyond the original building. The general store was saved, though it sustained some smoke damage. Eleanor's room above the store was intact, as was her sewing room. But the building that had burned belonged to the town's grain merchant, and his family had lost everything. As the sun rose on a new day, the full extent of the damage became clear. The merchant, a man named Mr. Yates, stood looking at the ruins of his business and home with devastation written across his face. Eleanor stood with Dalton and watched the scene, her heart aching for the family. Mrs. Yates held her 3 children, all under the age of 10, and tried to comfort them despite her own obvious shock. "We have to help them," Eleanor said. "We will," Dalton replied. "The whole town will. That is what we do here," and help they did. Within hours, the town had organized. Families opened their homes to the Yates family. Food was brought, clothes were donated, and a plan was made to rebuild the grain storage building. Dalton donated lumber from his ranch, and he spent the next 2 weeks working from dawn to dusk with the other men to rebuild. Eleanor threw herself into helping as well. She sewed clothes for the Yates children, working late into the night to replace what they had lost. Other women brought her fabric they could spare, and together they made sure the family had what they needed. Mrs. Yates came to thank her one afternoon, tears in her eyes. "I do not know how to express what this means to us. You have been so generous and you barely know us." "That does not matter," Eleanor said, surprised to find she meant it. "You would do the same for me, I think." "I would, Mrs. Yates agreed. "This town, these people, they take care of their own. You are one of us now, Eleanor. One of us." The words echoed in Eleanor's mind long after Mrs. Yates had left. She was part of something, part of a community. She belonged. That evening, Dalton came to collect her for dinner at his ranch. It would be the first time she had seen his home properly, and Eleanor felt nervous excitement fluttering in her stomach. His ranch was about 5 miles outside of town, a modest but well-maintained property with a sturdy house that he had built himself. As they approached, Eleanor could see cattle grazing in the distance, and the whole scene had a peaceful quality that immediately put her at ease. "It is not much yet," Dalton said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it is mine, and I am adding to it bit by bit." "It is wonderful," Eleanor said honestly. She could see the pride in the way he maintained the place, the care evident in every detail. Inside, the house was simple but comfortable. A large main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a fireplace that looked recently used. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "I am not much of a cook," Dalton admitted, "but I can make a decent stew." He set about preparing dinner while Eleanor looked around. The house was clean but sparse, clearly the home of a man who spent most of his time working. There were few personal touches, just the bare necessities. "You need curtains," Eleanor said, "and maybe some cushions for these chairs. It would make the place more comfortable." "I would not know where to start with that," Dalton replied, stirring the pot over the fire. "But if you want to make some suggestions, I would welcome them." They ate dinner at the small table, and afterward Dalton brought out coffee. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars appear through the window. "Eleanor," Dalton said eventually, setting down his cup, "I have been thinking about the future, about our future." Eleanor's heart began to race. "What about it?" "I know we have only been courting officially for a few weeks, but I have known how I feel about you for months now. And after seeing that fire, after realizing how quickly everything can change, I do not want to waste any more time." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I want to marry you, Eleanor. I want to build a life with you here on this ranch. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to support your dreams and have you support mine. I want children with you if God blesses us with them. I want everything, and I want it with you." Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I am," Dalton said. "I know I should probably wait longer, do this more properly, but Eleanor, I love you. I want you to be my wife. Will you marry me?" 6 months ago, Eleanor would not have believed she deserved this. She would have thought it a trick, a cruel joke, something too good to possibly be real. But Dalton had spent months showing her a different truth. He had proved her value every single day, not through empty words but through consistent action. He had helped her see herself as worthy, as valuable, as someone capable of being loved. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and clear. "Yes, I will marry you." Dalton stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time. "I do not have a ring yet," Dalton said, "but I will get you one, the best one I can afford." "I do not need a ring," Eleanor replied. "I just need you. You have me," he promised. "For the rest of my life you have me." They decided to marry as soon as possible, seeing no reason to wait. The church in Hillsboro was available the following month in November, and they set the date. Eleanor was filled with nervous excitement as she began preparing for the wedding. Mrs. Patterson, surprisingly, was supportive. "It is about time someone made an honest woman of you," she said, which Eleanor had learned was Mrs. Patterson's way of showing approval. You have earned some happiness, girl, and Dalton Young is a good man." Eleanor set about making her own wedding dress, pouring all her skill and love into every stitch. She used cream-colored silk that Dalton had ordered special from Dallas, insisting she should have the best. The dress was simple but elegant, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that flowed gracefully. The women of the town rallied around her, excited to have a wedding to celebrate. They helped her plan, offering advice and assistance with everything from the menu to the decorations. For the first time in her life, Eleanor felt what it was like to have a community of women supporting her, celebrating with her. Catherine, the woman from the barn dance, made one last attempt to interfere. She confronted Eleanor outside the general store one afternoon, her expression cold. "I hope you know Dalton is only marrying you out of pity," Catherine said. "He feels sorry for you, poor orphan girl with no family and no prospects. But pity is not love, Eleanor. Eventually, he will realize his mistake." A few months ago, those words would have devastated Eleanor, would have confirmed every fear she had about herself. But she was not that woman anymore. Dalton had shown her who she really was, and she had finally begun to believe it. "If you truly think that," Eleanor said calmly, "then you do not know Dalton at all. I am sorry for whatever hurt you are carrying, Catherine, but your words cannot touch what Dalton and I have. I hope someday you find someone who loves you the way he loves me. Everyone deserves that." She walked away, leaving Catherine standing there speechless. And Eleanor felt powerful in a way she never had before. She had not lashed out or crumbled. She had simply stated her truth and walked away. It was a revelation. The wedding day arrived cold and clear, the November sky a brilliant blue. Eleanor dressed in her beautiful gown, her hair styled by some of the women from town who had insisted on helping her prepare. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the defeated, hunched posture of the girl who had arrived in Hillsboro 5 months ago. In her place stood a woman who held her head high, whose eyes sparkled with confidence and joy. A woman who knew her worth. The church was packed with people, far more than Eleanor had expected. It seemed the entire town had turned out for the wedding, but Eleanor only had eyes for one person. Dalton stood at the front of the church in a new suit, looking nervous and excited and so handsome it made her breath catch. As she walked down the aisle, his face transformed. The love shining in his eyes was so powerful, so undeniable, that Eleanor felt her last remaining doubts melt away. This was real. This was happening. She was marrying the man she loved, the man who had saved her not by grand gestures but by daily, consistent proof that she mattered. The ceremony was simple and beautiful. They spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Dalton kissed her with such tenderness that Eleanor felt tears slide down her cheeks. The reception was held in the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Eleanor danced with her new husband, feeling like she was floating. She was surrounded by people who cared about her, who had come to celebrate this new chapter of her life. She belonged here. She had a home, a husband, a community. She had value, and she finally, truly believed it. As the evening wore on, Dalton pulled her aside. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Young, Mrs. Young?" Her new name, her new identity. Eleanor smiled. "I am ready." They drove back to the ranch under a sky full of stars. Eleanor nestled against Dalton's side. When they arrived, he swept her up into his arms and carried her across the threshold, both of them laughing. That night, in the home they would share, Eleanor and Dalton began their life together. He was gentle and patient, making sure she felt safe and loved. And Eleanor, who had spent so long feeling worthless, finally understood what it meant to be treasured. The next morning, Eleanor woke in her husband's arms, sunlight streaming through the window. Dalton was already awake, watching her with a soft smile. "Good morning, wife," he said. "Good morning, husband," she replied, the words feeling both strange and wonderful on her tongue. They lay there for a while, talking quietly about their plans for the day, for the week, for their life together. Dalton wanted to show her how to ride properly so she could help with the ranch work if she wanted. Eleanor wanted to start making those curtains and cushions to turn the house into a real home. "I also want to talk to Mrs. Patterson about reducing my hours," Eleanor said. "I still want to do some sewing work, but I want to have time for the ranch too, and for us." "I think that is a good idea," Dalton agreed. "You do not have to work yourself to exhaustion anymore, Eleanor. We are partners now. We will build this life together. Partners. Equal partners." It was a concept Eleanor was still getting used to, but she was learning. Over the next few months, Eleanor settled into her new life. She continued to do some sewing work, taking on the orders she wanted and politely declining others. She worked alongside Dalton on the ranch, learning how to care for the cattle, how to mend fences, how to do 100 small tasks that kept the operation running. But more than that, she learned how to be married, how to be part of a partnership. It was not always easy. There were disagreements about money, about how to handle various challenges that arose. But they worked through each issue together, learning to communicate, to compromise, to support each other. One evening in early spring, about 6 months after their wedding, Eleanor realized her monthly courses were late. Very late. She waited another week before saying anything to Dalton, afraid to hope, afraid to be disappointed. But when she finally told him, his joy was immediate and unrestrained. "We are going to have a baby?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "I think so," Eleanor replied. "It is still early, but yes, I believe so." Dalton pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby, our baby." The pregnancy was difficult at times. Eleanor dealt with sickness in the early months, and as she grew larger, the Texas heat became oppressive. But Dalton was there every step of the way, helping her when she felt ill, adjusting her workload, making sure she rested. The women in town rallied around her again, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and stories of their own pregnancies. Eleanor felt supported in a way that still sometimes surprised her. In late October, almost exactly a year after Dalton had proposed, Eleanor went into labor. It was long and painful, and there were moments when she was terrified. But Dalton stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, refusing to leave even when the midwife suggested he might be more comfortable waiting outside. Finally, after nearly 20 hours, their son was born. He came into the world wailing, his face red and angry, his tiny fists waving in indignation. "You have a boy," the midwife announced, placing the baby in Eleanor's arms. Eleanor looked down at her son, at this tiny person she and Dalton had created together, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. He was perfect. Every finger, every toe, every tiny feature was absolutely perfect. "He is beautiful," Dalton said, his voice choked with emotion. "Just like his mother." They named him Daniel, after Dalton's father. It was Dalton's way of extending an olive branch to his family back in Kansas, a sign that he was ready to reconcile. And when word reached Kansas of the birth, Dalton's father sent a letter congratulating them and expressing regret for the harshness with which he had treated his son. Being a mother was harder than Eleanor had imagined, but also more rewarding. Daniel was a fussy baby, demanding and loud, but Eleanor loved him with every fiber of her being. And watching Dalton with their son, seeing the gentleness and love he showed this tiny person, made her fall in love with him all over again. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. Dalton expanded the herd and added horses, just as he had planned. Eleanor eventually opened a small dressmaking business from their home, taking orders from women throughout the county. She enjoyed the work, but more importantly, she enjoyed having something that was hers, a way to contribute to their family's success. 2 years after Daniel was born, Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah. She was an easier baby than her brother, with a sweet disposition and a quick smile. Daniel adored his little sister from the moment he met her, declaring himself her protector. Life was not perfect. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, illnesses that swept through town, financial worries that kept them up at night. But they faced everything together, Eleanor and Dalton, partners in every sense of the word. One evening, when Daniel was 5 and Sarah was 3, Eleanor stood in the doorway of their home watching her family. Dalton was teaching Daniel how to rope a fence post, both of them laughing when the rope fell short. Sarah was playing with a doll Eleanor had made for her, singing a nonsense song in her high, clear voice. Eleanor thought back to the woman she had been when she first arrived in Hillsboro. That woman had believed she was worthless, a burden, someone who took up space she had not earned. She had arrived doubting her worth in every possible way. But Dalton had seen something different. He had seen her value, her strength, her capacity to love and be loved. And more importantly, he had proved it to her every single day. Not through grand gestures or empty words, but through consistent, steady action. He had shown her she mattered through 1,000 small kindnesses, 1,000 moments of choosing her, seeing her, valuing her. And in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift possible. He had helped her learn to value herself. Eleanor walked out to join her family, Daniel running to her with an excited shout about the rope trick he was learning. She scooped him up, laughing, while Sarah toddled over demanding attention too. Dalton came and wrapped his arms around all of them, and they stood there in the fading light, a family. "I love you," Eleanor said to Dalton, not for the first time but with no less feeling. "I love you too," he replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." The years continued to pass, bringing with them both joys and challenges. When Daniel was 7, Dalton's parents finally made the journey from Kansas to visit. It was an emotional reunion with apologies and forgiveness freely given. Eleanor watched as Dalton reconciled with his father, and she thought about how far they had both come from the broken, hurting people they had been. Dalton's mother, a kind woman named Margaret, took to Eleanor immediately. "My son chose well," she told Eleanor privately. "I can see the love between you, and I can see how happy you make him. Thank you for giving him a home and a family." "He gave me the same," Eleanor replied. "He saved me in every way a person can be saved." 3 years after Sarah, Eleanor gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Grace. The house was chaos with 4 children, but it was the most wonderful chaos Eleanor could imagine. She had never dreamed she could have this, a full, noisy, loving family that was entirely her own. Mrs. Patterson, who had retired and turned the general store over to her sons, came to visit often. She had softened considerably over the years, and she doted on Eleanor's children with the affection of an adopted grandmother. "I always knew you had it in you, Mrs. Patterson told Eleanor one afternoon as they watched the children play. "You just needed someone to believe in you." "Dalton did," Eleanor said simply. "He believed in me when I could not believe in myself." The ranch prospered beyond their initial dreams. Dalton became known throughout the county as a fair and skilled rancher, and people sought his advice. Eleanor's dressmaking business grew as well, and she took on an apprentice, a young woman who reminded Eleanor of herself when she first arrived in Hillsboro. Eleanor made sure to treat the girl with kindness and respect, to build her up rather than tear her down. She remembered what it was like to doubt your worth, and she was determined to help others avoid that pain if she could. When Daniel turned 16, he took over more responsibilities on the ranch, showing the same dedication and work ethic as his father. Sarah, at 14, had developed a talent for drawing and spent hours sketching the landscape and animals around the ranch. The twins, now 9, were still finding their way but showed promise in everything they attempted. One evening, Eleanor and Dalton sat on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of orange and gold. Their children were inside, arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to set the table for dinner. "You remember the day you arrived in Hillsboro?" Dalton asked, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. "Every detail," Eleanor replied. "I was so scared, so convinced I had nothing to offer anyone." "I knew the moment I saw you that you were special," Dalton said. "I could see it even if you could not." Eleanor leaned into him, comfortable in a way she had never been with another person. "You changed my life, Dalton. You showed me I had value when I could not see it myself." "You changed mine too," Dalton replied. "You made this house a home. You gave me a family, a purpose beyond just surviving. You made me want to be the best version of myself." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon. Inside, they could hear Sarah calling them for dinner, the twins arguing about something, Daniel laughing at whatever chaos was unfolding. "Should we go in?" Eleanor asked. "In a minute," Dalton said. "I just want to sit here with you for one more minute." So they sat, these two people who had found each other when they both needed it most. Two broken people who had helped each other heal, who had built a life and a family and a legacy together. Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that frightened girl on the stage coach to the confident woman she had become. It had not been easy, and there had been times when she had wanted to give up, to retreat back into the safety of believing she was worthless because at least that was familiar. But Dalton had never let her. Day after day, year after year, he had proved her value. Through his love, his respect, his partnership, his unwavering belief in her, he had helped her learn to believe in herself. And that, Eleanor thought, was the greatest love story of all. Not the dramatic declarations or grand gestures, though those had their place, but the daily, consistent choice to see someone, to value them, to prove through action that they matter. Inside, the children were getting louder, Sarah's voice rising above the din to insist that if someone did not come in right now, dinner would get cold and it would not be her fault. Eleanor laughed. "We should go in before we have a rebellion on our hands." "Probably wise," Dalton agreed, but before they stood, he turned to her and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Eleanor Young, today, tomorrow, and always." "I love you too," Eleanor replied, kissing him softly. "Thank you for seeing me, for believing in me, for never giving up on me." "There was never any question of giving up," Dalton said. "You were worth fighting for from the very beginning." They went inside to their family, to the chaos and love and laughter that filled their home. And as Eleanor looked around the table at her husband and children, at the life they had built together, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had arrived in Hillsboro doubting her worth, convinced she was a burden with nothing to offer. But Dalton had proved her value every single day, and in doing so, he had given her the greatest gift of all: the ability to see herself as worthy of love, of happiness, of a full and beautiful life. Years later, when Eleanor was in her 50s and her children had grown and started families of their own, she would sit on that same porch with Dalton and marvel at the life they had created. The ranch had grown to be one of the most successful in the county. All 4 of their children had stayed in the area, building their own homes and lives nearby. Eleanor had eventually closed her dressmaking business, but not before training 3 young women who now ran successful shops of their own. She spent her time now tending her garden, doting on her grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of the life she and Dalton had worked so hard to build. One particular evening, as they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with their children and grandchildren gathered around, Daniel stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "You have shown us all what real love looks like. Not the easy, fairy tale kind, but the kind that shows up every day. The kind that builds rather than tears down. The kind that sees value in people even when they cannot see it in themselves. Thank you for the example you set, and for the home you created for all of us." There were murmurs of agreement around the table, and Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes. She looked at Dalton, who was looking back at her with the same love and devotion she had seen in his eyes on their wedding day. "What do you think?" Dalton asked her softly. "Did we do all right?" Eleanor looked around at their children, all grown into good, kind people, at their grandchildren who were being raised with love and respect, at the home they had built, the community they were part of, the life they had created. "We did more than all right," she replied. "We built something beautiful." That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Eleanor and Dalton lay in bed talking as they had done countless times over the years. "You ever regret it?" Eleanor asked. "Marrying me, taking on someone with so much baggage and self-doubt?" Dalton turned to face her, his expression serious. "Not for a single moment. You were the best decision I ever made, Eleanor. You gave me everything that matters." "You gave me myself," Eleanor said softly. "You helped me find the person I was meant to be." "No," Dalton corrected gently. "I just helped you see who you already were. The strength, the kindness, the value, it was always there. You just needed someone to help you recognize it." They fell asleep that night as they had every night for 30 years, wrapped in each other's arms, secure in the knowledge that they were exactly where they belonged. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, she thought one more time about that frightened girl who had stepped off the stagecoach in Hillsboro so many years ago. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what waited for her. She would tell her that she was about to meet someone who would change everything, who would show her that she was worthy of love and respect and happiness. She would tell her that the journey would not be easy, that learning to value herself would take time and patience and courage. But that it would be worth it, all of it, because on the other side of that doubt and fear was a life more beautiful than she could imagine. But maybe, Eleanor thought as sleep claimed her, that girl had to walk the hard road herself. Maybe knowing the ending would have robbed her of the joy of discovering it step by step, day by day, through one man's patient, loving determination to prove her value, and prove it he had. Every single day for 30 years, Dalton had shown Eleanor through his actions that she mattered. And Eleanor had finally, completely, wholeheartedly believed it. That was their love story. Not a fairy tale, but something better. Something real and hard-won and more precious for having been fought for. It was a love story about 2 imperfect people who chose each other every day, who built each other up, who proved through action that love was not just a feeling but a choice, a commitment, a daily practice. And it was a love story about a woman who arrived doubting her worth, and a cowboy who proved her value every single day until she finally believed it herself. The end.